Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Susan Coffin at Attitude Magazine. I'm happy to welcome you today. Today we're very fortunate to have Dr. Craig Surman and Dr. Tim Bilkey, both experts on adult ADHD. Dr. Surman is an assistant professor of psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School, as well as the scientific coordinator of the Adult ADHD Research Program at Mass General Hospital. Dr. Tim Bilkey is the founder of the Bilkey ADHD Clinic for Women in Toronto, Canada, and the developer of Fast Minds, which is an accredited ADHD educational program for physicians. They are the co-authors of Fast Minds, How to Thrive If You Have ADHD or Think You Do. And for more information about their writings, I would refer you to the ADHDfastminds.com website, as well as, of course, to chad.org and attitudemag.com for more support and information. Dr. Surman and Dr. Bilkey will speak for a few minutes, give an introduction on the issues of adult ADHD and strategies for managing time and tasks and relationships, and they'll be happy to take your questions. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Tim Bilkey to start.
Well, thank you very much. Well, the label attention deficit hyperactivity disorder probably is not a good descriptor in adults. It doesn't speak to the important issue of impulsivity. So in adults, financial impulsivity, binging on alcohol, drugs, food, so ADHD as a label probably is not as accurate, and many of the adults we see are not wildly hyperactive. They're not bouncing off walls. It's a condition across the globe, so it's 1 in 25 people, affects 4% of the adult population, but women are often missed with this condition. They go under-recognized because they don't present as overtly hyperactive, often would present more with anxiety conditions, mood conditions, and so forth, but they struggle very hard with the societal expectations placed on them. In our treatments, medication is a cornerstone. However, recognizing where symptoms come and go in a person's life is very important. We feel that there are different versions of ADHD, so it's important from a psychoeducational perspective to have that, and then to address important non-drug strategies. So mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy is a very important intervention. Dr. Surman has published on CBT. It's evidence-based, and these were people who improved on medication, but the addition of important interventions like CBT made a large difference to them. Often adults with ADHD will have negative thinking patterns, which can be remediated with this treatment. People with ADHD also have difficulties with self-regulation, so regular habits. They often have disturbed circadian rhythms. They're night owls, so mornings are very slow. Exercise, adherence to a regular nutritional plan. These are important things in everyday life, but vital to the balance of somebody with adult ADHD.
Turning it over to Dr. Surman.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So, we want to have our acronym, Fast Minds, that Tim developed and we used in the book. It really sort of speaks to what it's like to live with ADHD. ADHD symptoms, as they're listed, isn't really what it's like to live with it. So these challenges you see in front of you, forgetful, time challenged, scattered, it's what people come in concerned about. And I think if people recognize these kinds of issues in their life and have had them for a long time, then, we think, ADHD is an appropriate home for them. The other conditions that we see, though, that produce these kinds of issues are numerous. And one of the things that I think is often lost is the importance of managing sort of other compromising mental states. So we talk a lot about, distraction in terms of sound and noise around you, but to me, it's distracting to a brain if it's anxious, if it's stuck in funks, or if there's some addiction gnawing at it constantly. And these are things that derail the ability to be in control and live an organized, focused life. Understanding this kind of distractibility internally as well as externally is, I think, really helpful. It allows people to sort of plan proactively, how to clear their mind of things, put it down on paper, get it out of their head, how to, clear out a workspace, even if it's just a card table they have to pull out of the closet when they've got that tough project to focus on. And this kind of sort of self-awareness can lead to forging new habits which you see in the next slide, that disorganization is really about doing the right thing at the right time. And we certainly see people with attention deficit, disorder, where it's about focus control, not being impulsive, not talking too much, not being physically restless. But about 30% of people also have a real issue with planning, prioritizing, doing the right thing at the right time. And you really shouldn't expect the medication to take care of those issues alone. People need to have strategies and find the right ones for them. And to that effect, it's not just the right strategy for the day or for the week or the month. We think that people need to see what's on the horizon. If you try to chart a course, you want to see where you're going. And this speaks to actually the kind of motivational structure that helps a lot of people to have some sort of vision and plan for the long run.
So, Dr. Surman, if I can clarify, I think that what you were saying is really interesting, is that medication will help the distractibility, but that to deal with planning, long-term planning and prioritization requires a different set of skills. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Right. And so, when you do an analysis of how organization improves during a clinical trial with a stimulant, you see improvement, but it's often the culprit, so to speak, when people don't respond to stimulant treatment. So there's a lot of folks who have ADHD where they've got organizational challenges that just are very resistant to the med treatments that we have. You'll see folks, for example, who are focusing on the wrong thing at the wrong time, and now they're super good at their blog or Facebook, but not at doing their bills, taxes, and communicating with their spouse in a proactive way. Right.
Okay. That's really interesting. Well, if you're ready to take some questions, there are a number of people on the webinar who have posted sort of looking for specific strategies to cope with some of the many, and you'll find these, I think, problems that adults with ADHD face. For example, someone who has said, I just can't keep up with the daily necessary activities from nail to cleaning. This is Anita, who's asking for help with, I guess, the tasks of daily life. Any thoughts there?
Did you want me to do that, or?
No, I can jump in. So I think it's common for people to struggle with day-to-day organizational tasks. It's even difficult to set what would be the priority in the moment. So we feel that setting up really consistent habits around these kinds of everyday tasks, because everybody can feel overwhelmed, especially women working in the home, working outside the home. They have multitudinous duties, and this can contribute to a feeling of being overwhelmed. But getting these good habits, often using someone outside yourself to assist. So this could be an organizational friend, it could be a neighbor, it could be a relative who has good executive functioning, can offer tips. And then sticking with these kinds of new habits, I think, is really important. It's even as important as noticing where you are distracted and what are the things that are playing a role in your particular life that can sidetrack you.
When you say bring in someone else, you're thinking people are wondering an ADHD coach, a psychologist. Do you have any preference in terms of?
Yeah, it could be any of those things. I think individual versions would dictate who that might be. I mean, I have some people that I see where a helpful neighbor can mentor and give them tips. But an ADHD coach could be very vital for the startup in terms of new habits. Counselors, there's a number of people who are aware of, good coaching tips. And I think finding somebody who can, act as this peripheral brain briefly so you get these habits, I think that's really important.
Okay. I mean, are you an advocate in these daily tasks, which I think everyone finds tedious and people with ADHD find almost impossible to complete, of daily lists? One person's posted here to say, I know that I've been recently diagnosed with ADHD. I know I'm supposed to make to-do lists, but I can't go so far as to remember to do that each day.
Well, that's a perfect example of a habit that it might take, a meeting with someone else to do it out loud verbally, for example, and just have a friend who gets you in the rhythm of it.
And she actually raises a really good point, that she says, precisely to your point about creating a habit, how does a single mother of 3 kids, 2 of whom have ADHD, who's in school, and full-time student myself, learn a new way of doing things when for 31 years I've been doing it one way that's not working for me now? So that's precisely to your point about new habits.
So I think it's this is particularly with women. So if they have executive functioning challenges themselves, and then their little kids with ADHD have identical kinds of executive functioning problems. So short-term working memory, time, and organization, it contributes to this feeling of just being, not fulfilling a person's role, which is far from the case. I think stepping outside and getting some assistance, so going on some websites, exploring the other options that may be able to offer you professional advice, I think that would be an important thing. It's worrying alone. It's being stuck and worrying by yourself. I think that contributes to lots of anxiety and stress.
Right, okay. So, speaking to this problem of inability to do paperwork and bills and taxes, and also to the point of thinking about other coexisting conditions, there's a post here from someone who says, just the prospect of looking at all the bills and paperwork that I'm not doing, it sends me into a real depression. And there's a second person who's also posted saying, I think depression and ADHD seem to be two parts of what's going on with me. Do you have any thoughts for how people treat or distinguish between depression and ADD, how they work together, and how they should be addressed?
Well, if I can jump in on that, I'd say that, first of all, I'm always thinking about the operating conditions of the brain. And one organizing idea in our book, Fast Minds, was to talk about the operating conditions of the prefrontal cortex. I think about it as sort of an etch-a-sketch, and if you know the device, you can draw something on it, but shake it up and it goes away. There's a lot of shaking going on in a brain that's got a lot of anxiety or depression, or just when there's a lot on the plate. And so my thought is that you really want to have the best operating conditions. And the two major things, one is that the tasks you are going to tackle are clear, and there's, that to me means that they're broken into steps, that there's, the next step is clear. It's not just an overwhelming do taxes. It's, collect my wage statements or something like this first. You make a list and break it down. And then I think everyone in the field feels that allows things to be parsable. It's a piece you can bite off and chew and say, did that, what's next? Now, you're talking about depression. You're talking about a state where the energy isn't there. There's a lack of the appropriate sort of attitude. The very palette that sort of, options are painted from is dark and negative. And it's hard to sometimes just differentiate between sort of the despondence and dismay of not being able to form the way that you feel you should versus being, stuck in depressed states. And I think the real difference often is how biological it is. So how much it's affecting sleep and eating, energy levels, ability to enjoy things, versus, a chronic sort of dismay and annoyance and negative self-talk, which is all too common in ADHD and definitely is a source of internal distraction, is not going to allow that prefrontal cortex to engage. Okay.
So in terms of addressing the depression, again, this is probably seeking help from a professional, I assume.
Certainly, but I think understanding what is depression in one's life is really critical. And so, in the book, we indicate sort of these other what we call comorbid conditions, which are all too common. And one common thing I think about is what's a long-standing set of traits that a person has, trouble getting around to things, sticking with things, finishing things, versus ruts that people end up getting stuck in. And often depression, but not always, is more of a state that one falls into, which is more, like I said, that you just the organism is not up to it, energy is not there, interest is not there.
So helping people think about what's going on, sort of distinguishing between a set of tasks that aren't getting done versus just a general low-level, steady lack of energy and dismay. Sort of distinguishing. You're saying, I think, self-awareness.
Well, they're intertwined things. So how one operates at one's best, can be enough of a frustration that I think it gives you more of a chance of getting depressed. And there may be biological reasons that people see both ADHD and depression a lot. But I think it's up to the individual to say, hey, look, I've got this long-standing pattern, but superimposed on it, I also have depression. And going to clinicians and saying, I'm depressed, is not going to get you the long-term support you need. You also want to say, I really struggle in this way, always have. Right now I'm feeling lousy, but gosh, there's this challenge there all the time.
Okay. All right. I've got it. Yep. Let's see. So many questions. So many good questions here. I try not to procrastinate, but sometimes I find myself doing something barely related to my original task that may need to be done, but not right away. And then sometimes I do a really poor job at something because I stick too close to the original plan without addressing connected issues that arise. How can I find a balance between doing it now and staying on task? There's a very specific one for you.
Well, yeah, I think that's such a common thing. I mean, everybody procrastinates around certain tasks. I guess it's up to 50% of university professors are procrastinators. But we see people who don't get their PhD, or we see people who don't finish important tasks, and there's huge consequences. So we think it's important to identify what we've called critical moments. And simply that's a moment when just before you want to do something that's important. It's what you might say to yourself, I could do this later, let me just check my email, this won't take very long, that sort of thing. It's what you're doing to follow a default path as opposed to addressing what you should be doing, which could be your political science essay or the bills or the taxes. So those critical moments for various people could be different, and it's recognizing initially where they come and go in your life. And then it's taking steps to address, instead of, as Craig has said, it's like you're not going to do the whole thing at once, breaking it down into definable bits, and then a brief reward. So that could be 5 minutes, you do something else, but you come right back to the task as opposed to, I recently was talking with a medical student. He can do 20 minutes of work and then he'll spend 2 hours online playing a game. So that would be a critical moment to recognize when that's happening to him and remediating that.
That sounds like really good advice. Identifying that trigger, that critical moment that gets you off track. Is that how does one do that? Keep a diary, or just any suggestions?
We talk about keeping track. So it's a self-check on so-called executive functioning. So issues around organization, setting priorities, and then figuring out a different way to manage that. I think it's really critical.
That's really interesting. Just before we leave this subject, there are just 3 or 4 people posting again saying, paperwork is my personal, moment of hell as an ADHD person, a huge challenge. Bills filing, please help. There's several of those. Any specific tips on that dreadful part of all of our ADHD lives?
I'd say that if you're facing a mountain, it's really hard to climb. If there's steps on it, it makes it a heck of a lot easier. So, you want to have a chunk you can chew, first of all. I do think you also want to have dedicated, protected time, in a place, for doing these things. And then if you've built things in so that you're, earning your reward, so to speak, it's another major important theme. So, and then the final thing, I think, would be accountability. And this is what we do in the book. We give people different sort of perspectives. We give people stories about how people have figured it out for themselves. We don't think there's a one-size-fits-all for this.
Okay.
But that accountability piece, in part, to me, is so critical. Part of it is about making it meaningful. A stack of paper is just a stack of paper. That deadline comes around, and your kid's not going to be able to enroll in camp, unless you get it in. Oh, my goodness. The foreman then, becomes interesting. Is there ways to make these things interesting on a more regular basis? And so, I know teachers who can't do their grading unless they have a grading party. And so they do it every 2 weeks, and they order pizza with their friends. And, it's like there's any way to make it interesting. But if there isn't, then you kind of just say, okay, look, that's my battle for today. That's my priority for today. I will do this. I will do this chunk of this. And really try to stack the deck in your favor in any way you can. Whether if you can't involve other people, if you can't make it fun with pizza, then is it just playing nice music, in a room that has nothing else in it but the grading,
Right.
And then finally the music gets annoying and you turn it off. You have to throw yourself into it, and there's nothing easy about it.
One thing that's worked for me, and I wondered if you advocate this, is is to say, okay, well, I can do this for 15 minutes. And then, of course, once you start doing it, you keep going until you finish it. But if I sort of say to myself, well, you know,
Yeah.
I don't have to do these bills all day. I can just do X.
That's right.
That's sort of,
Yeah, and I have a lot.
At least it works for me.
Yeah, I think that's really critical. It's like herding cats. You're kind of getting yourself a little bit engaged in the activity, maybe doing a peripheral thing. I'm just going to research something here, and then I'm going to get to it. And then, because we look at this as an engagement deficit, people with ADHD have an attentional system. They have great intellectual abilities and gifts, but it's engaging their focus, their concentration in this tedious, repetitive context. So it's kind of luring yourself in, and as you say, once you're on track, then people can go. So I think that's important.
Yep. We talked about starting tasks that are unpleasant. There's another set of questions here which relate to getting long-term projects done, really long-term. Like someone says, you know, I find it extremely difficult to wrap up projects that are way long-term, insert doctoral dissertation year. So what are some strategies for focusing and this maybe speaks a little bit to your 3 to 5 year plan concept, which has a number of people saying, whoa, tell us more about that. So this is how do you tackle long-term projects and can you talk some more about the idea of a long-term plan?
Yeah. So it's really interesting with ADHD because timelines can be very amorphous. So people tend to respond better to shorter bursts of activity. It's only for a few weeks or 6 weeks. I think this is why sales is a great area for people that can work on short bursts of activity, minimal paperwork. But if the timelines are dragged out and the reward is too far down the line, then underestimating time, saying, oh, yeah, I've got lots of time to do that, the organizational things drift away. So I think it's what we were referring to before. It's breaking it down, getting a timeline, and sort of concretizing that by the end of the month I need to have this done. And keeping, in the book we talk about keeping your eye on the prize. It's always refreshing yourself with why I'm doing this. If I can do step 1, then I'm that much closer to, you know, getting the dissertation, first chapter done, whatever. But it's every day sort of refreshing that for a person. Otherwise, you lose track and it drifts away and so forth, and it becomes very problematic.
Right.
I mean, if you chart a course, it's good to have way markers along the way to know you're on course. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, and if you've got a view like, okay, I really want to be in a different job, you know, in a few years. I imagine myself like this. I want to, you know, settle down and like, you know, actually like start to save, you know, for a house or, you know, change my budget and how I spend money. Whatever it is you want to do, if you set some sort of check-in, ideally with someone else. I mean, people are really the solution for so many of the folks that we work with that thrive. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a professional. It can be a friend that you're going to have coffee with. I know all these people that do these meetup groups, or, you know, with like basically startup entrepreneurs, and they keep each other on track, and they make business plans, and they like follow through on these things. They do little pitches to each other, and they wouldn't do it on their own. They wouldn't do it at that pace, at least. It's you know, the same deadlines that got you to hand things in school. You know, it might be rough still, but you're now making each step of the journey more meaningful and being held to it.
So this speaks to a couple of questions that have come in here, which say, I have a big disconnect between knowing what I should do and actually doing it. So
right.
You're saying, you know, spelling out the rewards and the long-term goal, keeping that in mind is the key part.
Well, I'm so passionate about this. I think that people can often look at where they have thrived, where they have done things that are like the things that are hard for them now. What did it take? And often it is other people or some kind of structure. I have a physician that I work with who says, give me a list. If I don't have a list, I'm lost. I wander to the cafeteria. The secretary's calling me, where are you? Like, you know, and she's like, oh, I didn't give you the list today of stuff you had to do. And so everyone's different in this way. Some people are very self-structured.
Right.
But, you know, what was it that helped you? Was it that you were helping someone else? I've got, patient that's in the book that what she offered was that she literally ran a marathon because she didn't want to let her trainer down. I mean,
Right.
and she's proud she did it. It's like some people, everyone's wired differently about what motivates them, what compels them. So this is a know thyself kind of message. And
Okay.
if you landed at college and you were lost, then that means probably you need structure, you need some kind of parental-like figure, you need a boss to answer to or someone to collaborate with.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, having a structure around which to keep yourself functioning. So as an adult with ADHD, asking me to come up with a monthly plan is practically impossible. A 3 to 5 year plan is likely as swimming from California to Hawaii.
Yeah.
Every 15 minutes planned out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, the issue is we meet many people who are living in the moment because it's so easy to get attracted to novelty, new things. They have a passion, they dive in. But once the kind of novelty wears off, the shininess, the newness, whatever, it could be a school program, it could be a new job, then function can drift away. So this living in the moment thing is a real critical issue. So we talk a bit about aptitudinal strengths. So all of us self-select for a kind of job that we have some abilities, we like it, we care about it. Craig just talked about his great passion for what he does. So we think it's important to capture that. That obviously could be very different for a lot of people. Sometimes aptitude of vocational assessment, having a formalized testing to find out what you're really good at and the kinds of jobs that you'd be best suited for. It's very important. I know it's with a lot of university students. They'll go to a certain school. You ask, why did you go to that school? My girlfriend or my boyfriend was going there, or they weren't going there, whatever. So it's picking the right program, picking the right school, and already you're looking down the road, and I'm going to this school, and I'm going to get into this course because I'm looking for a job in X. And already that's the 3 to 5 year thing, because the time issue with ADHD is a real challenge, and I think that reduces this tendency where people take a little bit of this, get bored, switch off to something else, go on to a new project, and it doesn't look great on job resumes when you've got 25 different things that you've done. So it's helping people tie their abilities to this thing that they want to do for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, there's a motivational deficit to this, too. I mean, people just don't have the motivation. And just literally what you said, Tim, about, like, knowing what the job looks like. So shadowing somebody, and so you know what you're getting into and be inspired for it and say, that's cool, I want to do that, and then you do the coursework.
So there are some questions here about choosing the right career for an ADHD person, and I think what I hear you saying, which makes enormous sense, is that the key issue for anyone, but especially for people with ADD or ADHD, is to find something that they truly will become passionate about, so that it is interesting. Is that, am I reading you correctly on that?
I think it's really critical. I had a fellow referred to me once, and I said, what do you do for a job? He said, I'm a sink inspector. And I said, oh, what do you do? He said, well, I check the leaks and sinks. I'm on an assembly line. And I said, you know what? I really don't think you need an ADHD assessment, because I don't know anybody that I've ever assessed who could do a job like that. So the repetitive stuff is...
By definition,
the repetitive didn't have... I don't know what he had. He had something else. But with ADHD, it's finding out what you're intrinsically interested in. I mean, generically, sales is fine. A lot of people like outdoor work where you have certain short bursts of activity and onto different projects. Lots of people get attracted to computer IT types of jobs, but we don't see tons of chartered accountants, bookkeepers. The lawyers that we see are more criminal lawyers. The physicians tend to be attracted to the ER or surgery.
ER, right.
Yeah.
So stimulation, something new happening, etc.
Yes, and there's support. Yeah, and there's support in the workplace.
What engages you naturally? People will do more easily what they're interested in or what they're good at. And you do see some of these people, but it seems there's not as many who are accountants and very detail-focused. And that's just their thing. Maybe they're amazing with numbers, and that's their thing, and they're really focused on it. And so what is not natural for a person, what is not interesting for a person, is just harder if you've got the inattentive symptoms to focus on. And so what you want to know is not just like are you going to be interested in the content of the moment-to-moment of the job, but also, is the structure right? Are you one of these kids who had parents on you about homework and then you couldn't make it to class on time in college and, had trouble and had to take classes, only at certain times? I mean, what environments can you stand? Do you need a boss that you respect and that you meet with every week? Or do you really need flexibility just to do it your way and stay late and at least get paid?
Mm-hmm. So Amanda, who's listening, this conversation's been for you. She's asking for help changing careers and what resources would work for changing careers for an ADDer. And I think that the discussion we just had was really helpful in that regard. Figure out both the environment you need to work in and what you really love to do, as opposed to focusing on what job might work for any person with ADD, I think is.
Yep.
Just some questions that relate to more than one person. So, for example, a family sort of nexus. And here's my daughter's 20 and I'm 55, and we're twins in our ADHD. We are great at enabling each other's really bad behaviors: snacking, messing, TV watching. How can we best help each other? So there's sort of a mutual ADD fest.
Yeah, that's interesting. So part of, as I said at the outset, so impulsivity is a core symptom, and sometimes binging on things. I mean, high-carb diet, chocolate, all that stuff dries up dopamine, which is all that our medicines do for ADHD. So those would be critical moments. It would be where you're, binge, sort of eating to excess. It's the environment. It might be the emotional things, the emotional triggers, which may be driving that. And then have a discussion, and then both parties, mom and daughter, can develop a new habit. We're not going to eat in front of the TV, or there's certain things we won't have in the house. I had an executive that I saw yesterday, and he can adhere to his diet until he goes home, and then his partner cooks all kinds of great stuff, but he can't really stop. It's not like often people with ADHD have two speeds, 0 and 100 miles an hour. So that kind of middle gear where I'm just going to have 3 cookies as opposed to whatever. So I think if they could talk about it, they could be what we call externally accountable to each other. They'll have an agreement that we're going to get new habits around what we eat, when we eat. And we also talk in the book about regular meals, starting off with breakfast and having frequent meals to forestall when your sugar drops, and then you want to eat everything in sight, sort of thing. And that could be for everyone, but with ADD, I think that they're more prone to it. Okay.
Another family question. An adult with ADHD with 2 children who struggle with ADHD, and this person, Karen, is asking, this may be a little bit off topic for our webinar on adults, but she's asking what support she can provide at home for her children to improve their organizational skills, I guess, and her own.
So I think that picking a strategy is really the key, and introducing its elements one at a time in a way that's actually fun. And I really believe that lifelong habits start at home. And my personal thing that I would start with is some sense of schedule. And it doesn't mean micro schedule, every 15 minutes is planned. But bedtime would be a personal favorite because sleep is so critical for brain function. Meal times, and really starting with that, and then adding on, as kids get older, roles and responsibilities in ways that help the household and are expected. And again, as Tim was talking about, sort of the accountability that people can have when they're both in it together, if it's just set from the beginning, these are the expectations, this is what we do as a family, I think it goes a long way. There will be variations that are needed for each individual. People may need a 5-minute reminder, like someone in our book, to come up from the basement, before dinner, and that's just a 5-minute warning, and that's what their transitions are like. So understanding the individual's needs so they can perform their best is really critical, but some kind of schedule, and key, like sort of, tasks that are, again, for the family, just expected from the beginning. I think I'm a big fan of that kind of approach.
Yeah, and of course that's really challenging for the parent with ADD. number of people have said I have a really hard time getting dinner on the table at the same time and doing the same. But it seems like a worthy goal, both for the reasons the person asked the question, both for the family as well as for the children, to have some schedule that works. You mentioned getting to bed at a regular time. A number of people have asked about that. Great difficulty falling asleep, going to sleep, staying on schedule. One question is from a college student, another was from an adult, looking for some thoughts on the issue of sleep. Is it your sense that that's a common, insomnia is a common symptom for adults with ADHD?
Hey, both Tim and I can handle this one. Tim, you want to do that one?
Well, I'll jump in a little bit, and once you jump in as well. So the chronotype tends to be more the night owl. We have a lot of university students who say, my brain seems to be a bit more clear, I work better at night, and of course it's quieter at night and so forth. The problem with that is time drifts away, they get online, stumble upon, they get stuck in the Wikipedia loop, and then it's 3 in the morning, and mornings are foggy, don't eat breakfast, first meal of the day is like at 1, that sort of thing. The other issue is that people have a hard time falling asleep. I mean, Craig's done studies on this, but briefly, just because you shut off the light, it doesn't mean your fast mind's going to turn off. And so, again, I think it's adopting these kinds of good habits, rules, because I notice that there's a lot of flex in terms of when people go to bed. They often sit on the computer late at night, and there's some evidence that the light from the computer can break down melatonin, which is the hormone that makes us sleepy. And then instead of getting sleepy in bed, they're on the phone, on the computer. They're actually getting activated, and it's hard to. It's even worse in terms of falling asleep.
Right.
And so I just want to say that I think sleep hygiene is so important, and that if you don't respect the fact that we're mammals and cued in our wake sleep cycle by light and by melatonin, then you're not going to have a good sleep-wake cycle. And as Tim said, there's a lot of reasons people end up active and not, falling asleep. But some people just don't know the sleep hygiene rules. The way I see sleep is it's a habit, and you can very easily get into a bad habit if you have ADHD and you're working late as a night owl, or if you have trouble organizing bedtime. So, in the book we focused on sleep as one of the things where you can make habit change. We have to know which what you're looking for as a pattern. For example, many people find that they can, if they toss and turn in bed, that as long as they keep it to only 20 minutes of tossing and turning and then get up and sit in a dark area, it eradicates that over as short as a week of doing that. And people don't know this, that they can be cued into habits and can get out of the habits. So ADHD to me is often sort of resolved through this combination of medication and habit management. And so understanding what you want the habits to look like, I think, is really key.
Interesting. So seeing sleep and good sleep as a habit that you have to develop, just like any other habit. Eating well.
Right. To get back to critical moments that Tim mentioned, I mean, there's a critical moment that's different for everybody around bedtime or quality of sleep. It could be that your day hasn't felt accomplished because you took on too many priorities, and your mind is just full at the end of the day. It could be that you really didn't have any wind down time. And so in watching, the horrors on the nightly news just before bedtime is your idea of a wind down. So looking to, what's it going to take for me to wind down and be prepared for bed? I have patients who get in their pajamas as soon as they get home and serve dinner that way. I mean, it's just because they know that once they get tireder, they're more likely to wander off, and that's one more step for them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a high school student that I just saw, and she this is the opposite of Craig's story, she wears her pajamas to high school. And so she has a pretty disturbed sleep-wake cycle. Yeah.
Well, I have a teen daughter, a college student daughter, who might fall in that category. Yeah, definitely. Speaking of screen time and how it disrupts sleep cycles, there are also some questions relating to sort of hyperfocus, addiction to monitors, and one person is asking specifically about addiction to pornography online.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on dealing with those sorts of
I think
internet behaviors?
Yeah, I think the internet is a constant source of novelty. Tactile, auditory, visual stimulation. So basically anything electronic with a screen, it's like a vortex. It's like a Vulcan mind meld for people to to get absorbed into. And these websites like stumble upon, something pops up and then there's 15 more sites that you might want to research. That can keep people constantly sort of entertained or stimulated. People talk about hyperfocus, but I don't know about Craig, but I don't notice people hyperfocusing on, their statistics, homework, and their taxes and so forth. So, if that were so, that would be great, I guess. But I think certainly internet addiction, I believe that's going to be in the DSM-5 in May. I think people clearly can get addicted to things, pornography, online gambling. There's a lot of areas that are extremely problematic. So this area of sort of overlap between ADHD and potentially addictive things, I think that's also critical moments. That's where people need to get it up on the radar. I said I'd only do it for 20 minutes, and now I'm into my third hour. That's a problem.
So one thing I tell people really briefly about this is know where you're getting your dopamine and understand that the dopamine in our brain is a cue to make us sure that we eat, clothe ourselves and make babies. And it's if you can get dopamine other ways through a blast of very interesting content, playing video games, pornography, a hit of marijuana, whatever your drug is, alcohol, then it is not an earned reward in the same way. It is not a healthy reward in the same way. And people end up in patterns where it doesn't matter what their intention is. Their brain knows that hit is there. It's wired to look for it, and their behavior is organized around it. And the deeper you are into that, the more help you need, the more you need to spread the concern out with other people, get involved in the 12-step kind of programs. I really think that's a different issue when people are deep in that kind of pattern than ADHD. But people have trouble steering around things that are really interesting and engaging. And unfortunately, this stuff is readily available. It can not just engage you, it can basically derail you.
Right. Definitely. Some questions on diet, a number of specific things, the effect of chocolate, the effect of alcohol is mentioned here. There are a number of people asking for information about your advice on diet and the effects of substances such as chocolate or alcohol.
Well,
I did. Yeah, go ahead.
I think all of these things, as Craig has said, drive up dopamine. So if you're insufficiently treated for ADHD or untreated, so insufficient means not optimized, so you may be on some medicine, but the symptoms aren't totally in remission, then people are subject to find other ways to raise dopamine. So cigarette smoking, nicotine is a very potent enhancer of dopamine. So I think it's a critical moment kind of situation. You have to recognize, for example, I had an engineer that I saw recently. He can eat 6 pounds of chocolate in one sitting. Okay, well, that's a binge. That's a bit of a thing. So all of these can potentially have addictive-like capacity, and it could be different for everyone, and sometimes rotate through them. So alcohol could be an issue, and then cannabis, marijuana becomes more of an issue, and then they stop doing that and they go on to something else. And I think getting that on the radar and realizing that there's a greater tendency with ADHD to be absorbed into that is really, really important.
Okay. Interesting. This person says, I get stuck in my computer because there's so many tools. A number of people have written about their difficulty making decisions. So one person said, you suggest picking a strategy, but I've got 8 strategies. I can do pie charts, lists, X, Y, and I have a really hard time picking among them. Another person posted that, they'll lay out 10 options and be frozen in terms of moving forward. I think that is sort of a common complaint among adults with ADHD, sort of obsessing over rather than picking and moving forward. How to break that habit of laying out 20 options and focusing on them all.
Well, I like cognitive behavioral therapy techniques for this kind of thing. You want to understand, what is it that's happening? Is it something you're telling yourself? Is this a situation where you're actually doing sophisticated procrastination? There are people who over-research, their paper when really they just have to write the darn thing. They've got enough for a thesis.
Right.
And, one simple technique I use with people is a pro-con list. And, so you have two columns. If you've got multiple options now, I think that's complicated, but I don't. You'd be doing a spreadsheet and spending time on that. So you really want to define what's the core decision you're trying to make, and then really do a pro-con on the core of it. And people will have a very difficult time getting into mind eddies, because and off obsessing and forest for the trees kind of
Right.
brain style. And every one of those needs its own kind of structure. I think that one of the most powerful things for people is to talk through and hear themselves talk out an outline of what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. Just hearing it out loud, you can almost focus on it better. So those are just some ideas.
Okay.
Sometimes sitting with a coach, sometimes sitting with a best friend. Here are 10 things. I had somebody recently, his partner would give him like 15 things to do at home. And but he gets stuck. He couldn't pick the thing. And she would basically say, look, these are the 3 things I'm talking about. Do this one first. So, again, checking it out with somebody else, see what they feel, and then off you go.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. To your point about cognitive behavior therapy and self-talk, there are 3 or 4 people on the webinar who have posted that that's a real issue for them, hearing themselves saying you're a dope, you're, talking negatively to them in their heads, sort of hearing an internal noise that's sort of saying constantly, reminds them of their failures. What is the best course of action for turning around that kind of negative self-talk, and is it associated with ADHD?
Well, absolutely. I mean, so the cognitive behavioral therapy studies that we've done, other folks have done, one of the people have really valued the focus on self-talk. Classically, the self-talk work is, in depression and anxiety, but it's so important in ADHD too. Your brain can't work as well if you're, just basically kicking yourself and spending your mental effort on that.
Right.
So in the book, we talk about blaming fast minds, blaming, this basically sort of more how you're wired, and then move on and have a set of challenges. But it's a real pattern, and I think one of the most helpful things is if people can do thought records like we have in the book, and that's a classic technique. You can look up online, understanding what kind of thinking they're doing. It's thinking about your thinking. Yeah, it's
what is it? Could you describe the thought record?
So a thought record is that you describe the situation, you describe what you're thinking, you identify the hottest thought. That's an emotional thought. I can't do this. I always fail. Something like this. It's a very dramatic thought. And then you try to counter it with what a friend would say. And this may seem like a mundane exercise and like, oh yeah, I can always talk myself through things. But can you? Can you practice it? And how do you distill that? Is there some mantra that you can put in it? Like, there I go catastrophizing again. Or there I go telling the future again. I should open a horoscope shop. Something just humorous you can tell yourself. Like, how do you know this is going to go as badly as before? Wow, look how much energy I'm spending on this. Anything that distances you from it. And it takes practice. You can do it with a CBT therapist. And there's a number of CBT books. I think our book gives people a chance to develop that kind of thing too. And it's called metacognition. It's this idea that you're curious and interested in your pattern of thinking. Because the idea is that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all connected. If someone's paralyzed, very depressed, very anxious, I think it's very hard to even entertain alternative thoughts. But if you're in a space where you can come up with something to tell yourself that's a little, a little bit of a mantra, and that's ideally humorous. It just creates a moment that you're saying, I'm choosing how I'm going to see and do my life.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense that some humor goes a long way, I think, especially when you're berating yourself for things. There's a lot of interest in the webinar. I'm learning more about how CBT helps improve executive functioning, which was one of the earlier statements that you made. Any amplification you want to offer on that? How does one find a cognitive behavior therapist? What do you propose to folks in terms of following up on that idea, which I think is an important one?
Well, we developed Fast Minds so people could be their own, to some degree, cognitive behavioral therapists. Because what we found in the CBT is it's a capital B. You're giving people behavioral strategies, like use a planner, use a task list, the popcorn thoughts that pop into your mind, have a place to write them down, one place, not sticky notes everywhere. Just like, you're trying to pick a battle each week in the 12 weeks of the therapy, or you're doing it in a group. And there's only a few places, I think, that do this in a systematic way. And so if you're near one of those places, great, and you can look for people who have advertised cognitive behavioral therapy for ADHD. But what we think people should do is figure out what habit is going to be most critical for them. What's the critical moment? What's the thing that's going to help them? What are they not doing among the kinds of things we talk about in the book? And then how do they want to implement that? And it doesn't have to be a trained CBT professional that holds you accountable to it. It just doesn't. It could be a spouse. It could be a coworker. It could be a friend.
That's an important insight. You don't have to find someone to spend a huge amount of money. You can tackle this yourself. If you know what you're headed out to do. Well, your book sounds like an incredible resource. So I want to repeat the name of it for everyone online. It's Fast Brain.
Fast Minds.
Fast Mind. Fast Minds, How to Thrive If You Have ADHD or Think You Might. So we're coming to the end of our time, and this has been fascinating. Are there any final words of wisdom that you'd like to bring forth?
Oh, that's Tim's department.
Close?
Well, so Craig and I have both seen people who really never got diagnosed until maybe the 30s or midlife. And the interesting thing about ADHD is it's never too late. People respond to the treatments, medicine and non-medical treatments, just as well as little kids and teens. My oldest patient's 82, so there's always... it's never too late with this. The treatments work very well. Doesn't matter how long you've had it. And from the varied interventions that we've talked about, people can get their own version of this and can really move forward in a different trajectory in their lives.
That's completely inspirational. I thank you both very much for all the work that you do and for spending this hour with us.
My pleasure.
Great pleasure. Thanks. Bye.
For more Attitude Podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.